Well, the impact of climate change is being seen and, of course, felt across various industries around the world. Now, here in Africa, around 42% of businesses have indicated they've not sufficiently factored climate change into their health and security plans. And that's according to the International Risk Outlook's 2023 report. Well, I go even further, where some companies, we understand, aren't even sure if they have any plans. So how do you do this? And what does it mean going forward if you don't? And what does it mean going forward if you do? And how do you improve on that? Dr. Chris Van Straten is Global Health Advisor for Clinical Governance at International SOS. Doctor, good to have you on eNCA. I appreciate your time. Let's first of all start with companies, if you don't mind, who don't even know if they have plans. How do you not know if you have plans, A, and then B, if you don't, where do you begin?
Great question. Thanks for inviting me on the show. Some companies only find out when there's a crisis, and they find out the hard way, and they can't manage with the crisis. So there are international sort of guidelines or policies. It's interesting to see what the Fortune 500 are doing, and many or most of them have a playbook for the scenarios that are predicted, even if it is rare or unlikely. So getting back to climate change is interesting. There's a lot of discussion on climate change, the impact of the economy and on environments, but there's not often a more nuanced discussion about the health impacts. And I think the unusual outbreaks we've seen, it's been in the media, SARS, Ebola, COVID-19, monkeypox, they're regularly in the headlines. And climate change is increasingly recognized as a contributing factor in accelerating the emergence of these diseases. And we're seeing a shift in these diseases. We're seeing more dengue or Zika and malaria in areas we didn't previously see. And these are, if you're aware of it, you've got the right data, you can make plans to mitigate, keep your staff safe, and protect your bottom line. So data, tracking the data, analytics, and making a plan. And sometimes that requires people to help you review.
I would imagine then, Doctor, that being in Africa, we have a fairly unique climate issue that we're all very aware of. I was hoping to speak to the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro Mayor regarding their water crisis. Now, if we're talking about Africa as a whole, would it be fair of me to suggest that the biggest climate crisis we're facing, not just for population, but for businesses around the continent, is that going to be of a lack of water?
Yes, absolutely. There's been a lot written and published on this. So whether it's water scarcity and making sure you've got water to grow food or for sanitation, basic hygiene, or when we've seen these incidents like we saw in Durban, and we're seeing at the moment in California, where now there's an excess, we're not prepared for it, and that damages the infrastructure further, resulting in health issues. But again, one can plan and mitigate.
Doctor, you're still with us as well, and I want to try and get a sense then, if we try and mitigate a situation like this, do you get a sense then in South Africa that we're just going to be complacent about this until, as you said at the start of our discussion, until you've got a crisis? Where does a company begin to go to try and get onto this? Do we just meet with our health and safety officers? Where do we go as companies to try and make sure that we at least not mitigate everything, at least try and manage it better?
Yeah, great question. It will depend on the company, the size, the risk appetite, and there certainly are different consultancies in country, but also globally, that are engaging in this. And the survey that was done, the Ipsos survey, that companies based in Paris in France with International SOS, have been doing exactly this for many years, and now specifically looking at Africa. What do people have in place? And if they don't have in place, what information can they get and how can we support them? So there are different companies addressing this, and it can't just be left up to government. It needs to be companies engaging and taking it further. Good question.
Without trying to sound insensitive to companies, I'm wondering if companies will do this if there isn't an incentive. Let's be honest, big corporates tend to only really do anything when there's a tax rebate, a tax return, or a big slap on the wrist from government if they don't do it in the form of taxes, for example. Do you get the sense companies in Africa will do it? And are we seeing companies willingly wanting to do it on the international stage?
Oh, that's a great question. A hard question. The international stage and some of the companies we've certainly engaged with, it's impressive to see what some have done. Yes, they're big. Yes, they have the money to put into it. And looking at some of their data for $1 in, it was estimated or $4 saving out, with the premise being that a healthy, productive worker is someone who's going to contribute and you're going to save on your bottom line. Whether that's how much of that's been taken up in the African context, we're still unsure. We get a sense that about 14% of people say, hey, we're thinking about it. We're planning to put money towards it. But that survey didn't go further to say exactly in what depth they went. But I think we need to be talking about this, and I think we certainly need to try and push that agenda. But I want to just reemphasize there is increasing evidence that shows money put into well-being and into duty of care. Healthy, happy staff are productive, and you want to keep people productive, and that impacts on the bottom line.
I know you mentioned government a moment, Doctor, saying that government can't do this all by themselves, that the private sector, big business has to come in as well. And while I'm not disagreeing with you, do you have the opinion that government is doing enough in leading this fight against climate change and making us all aware? Many environmentalists I've spoken to will suggest no. It seemed we were completely caught off guard, for example, with the flooding in 2 provinces last year, and no one seems to really know where that came from or how to fix it or how to prevent it in future.
Yeah, again, you asked me some really good and really hard questions. So the answer is I'm not going to critique on government's approach. My personal thinking is we all need to do more, and I think government could do more. And a lot of this also impacts with the power outage, the loss of power, whether it's here or what they're experiencing right now in parts of America too, where the systems are down due to massive storms, could have been prevented if there'd been forethought and planning, whether that's in terms of flood mitigation measures. And then when the flooding happens, it's not just government, though, that needs to plan. When a flood happens, many systems are impacted, whether that's getting fresh water, electricity, sanitation, and businesses can already start thinking and planning about if we get a flood, what are we going to do about it? Hoping, well, government too needs to bring their side to it. So I think, in honesty, the answer is probably not as much as could have been done. And again, it's not going to help if we sit idly on one side, ignoring it. It's something we all need to pull together and talk about.
No, Doctor, I couldn't agree with you more, and I really appreciate your time in coming on. It's such a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure we're going to pick it up again on how companies are preparing themselves for climate change. Not if it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. We cannot be denialists anymore about climate change. Dr. Chris Van Straten, thank you very much indeed from International SOS. I certainly hope I get a chance to speak to you again in the near future.